Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm Diane Deziel and today we're doing the front part of that blouse that we started in my last video. Just take your point and overlap exactly at the right place and make sure your seam line is also overlapping the rest of your shoulder. Now since this is a very tiny correction, I'm just going to connect with the 90-degree I have from the center back. The part that is overlapping, I'm going to find it by tracing with my tracing wheel. Now my next step is going to be to trace the placement of the two pleat dart that I have at the shoulder. Now if I want 3 even parts, I'm going to measure my new shoulder and divide it by 3. So from the new point at the neck all the way to the notch, then move it and place it on the second notch all the way to the other seam of the armhole. I found 14 centimeters and I'm going to divide this measurement by 3. It gives me 3 sections of 4.7. So I'm going to measure 1/3 from the neck point and I'm going to do the same thing from the armhole point. Now the next step is going to be to decide the length where you're going to sew those pleat dart. If I look at my illustration and I say my apex is about over here and the end of the stitch is over here, you could say that it's roughly halfway between the shoulder and the apex. So you could do the same thing on your plan, just measure all the way to the shoulder and divide pretty much halfway. So for me it's going to be sewn on 13 centimeters. Now on my bodice, I'm going to trace a line of 13 centimeters touching the first third of the shoulder and parallel to the first side of my shoulder dart. Now we're also going to do it on the other side of the dart, so parallel to the side of the dart, touching the 1/3, the last third on the shoulder, and the line will be also 13 centimeters. Now, as you must know, I like to do my development by pivoting, but this time, to make it more visual for you, I decide I'm going to do it by slashing. So I'm going to take my full pattern, open it, I will keep one side as my block, and I will use the side where I trace all my reference line to develop my pattern. I did put it over a different color cardboard, so you're going to see very well where goes the dart. Of course, I use a larger paper and I fold it in the middle because that's the way we do asymmetrical pattern. The first thing I'm going to ask you is to trace a line from the 13 centimeter or the end of your pleat all the way to the apex, and you do the same thing with also the other pleat. The next thing I'm going to ask you is to cut from the shoulder to the apex on both sides of the original dart, and you're going to remove completely that triangle. We're going to cut on both the style line, following the angle on both sides. Now what we're going to do is find the middle between the first pleat to the last pleat. We just mark the middle point. Now just like I did, you could close the original dart, bringing one side of the dart next to the other one, glue them together. Then at the shoulder, you're going to measure and find also the center point. We're going to place this middle point exactly over the middle point we found on the big opening. So just like that, overlapping. And that's the way you distribute the value of the one big dart into 2 even darts. Now what I propose to avoid extra fabric at the shoulder is to place seam allowance on each side of each pleat dart. Now before to cut all around my new pattern, we're going to do 2 little things. First, you're going to place your ruler touching the end of your seam and trace, and we do that on both sides. And the second thing is going to be to add seam allowance next to the new neckline. Now we could cut the pattern all around. Now you could see my two pleat or dart that I empty. And if you remember, those style line didn't go right away to the apex, but they were parallel to the side of the dart, then go to the apex. And that means that the inside line and the outside line, they don't match perfectly anymore. So we're going to have to do a little correction. To do the correction, I'm going to ask you to trace the seam line on one side of each dart or pleat. So you could engrave it to make it easier to fold. Just like that. Then also for both pleats, you're going to fold the way you're going to assemble. That means you bring the seam allowance over the seam allowance and just fold a little bit the pleat. So you do that for both of your pleat, and then you're going to fold it in the final position. So fold the seam, bring it over the other one, just the way it's going to be sewn. If you're working with paper, you could pin it together while you do the second side. Now when they're in position, you take your ruler and you trace from the neck point to the armhole point. And we're going to cut all the excess. Now, of course, since we have the full bodice, we're also going to do this little correction on both sides. Now we're ready to do the style line for the opening. If you could see, the opening ends at the side seam a little bit below the waist. So you could decide the area. On my pattern, I already indicate my waistline with a notch. So I'm going to decide where I want my opening to end. Then we could trace the style line. You could start with a straight line and then curve it with your French curve, or you could even trace it by highs, but I suggest it's slightly curved towards the bottom. Now we're going to continue with the other style line, that is the point at the bottom on this side. Remember, when you trace your style line, that you always lose the depth or the width of your body. So if you do your point, for example, too close to the side seam, you might not going to see it from the front. Now if I could guide you a little bit for the placement of that point, I would say it's more or less the area of your apex. So on my pattern, my apex is more or less over here, so I would go down and do my point right there. Now we're ready to trace that point. So you're going to start at the side seam where you end your first style line, and you're going to trace all the way to the bottom point that we found. Now to find the shape at the bottom and the length on the side seam and at center front, I'm looking at the point level, and I'm going to say that it should be a little shorter so the point shows, and the side seam should be a tiny little bit higher also. And on the side seam, to create the shape, I'm going to go about 2.5 centimeter higher and indicate the level at the side seam. Now we're going to fold back the pattern so we could report the side seam measurement. I'm now going to trace a line 90 degrees from the center front for about 5 centimeters. Then I'm going to connect this level with the side seam level with the stretch S shape. Now we do know that the hem is different on both sides, but the level should be the same. So I'm going to retrace my hemline to have the level on the other side. We have to connect the point to the side seam point. So you could start with a straight line, and then you're going to go slowly connect with a curved line to the side seam. There's another style line or another seam here that separates the two pieces, the large piece with the bottom, and this seam is going to allow us to hold the little side panel that we have over here. So we have to trace that line parallel to the style line about 4 centimeters wide. Before to cut the excess of paper I have, I'm going to add my hemline, parallel one side to the other, and that little part over here. I'm not going to put nothing on this style line because that's a piece that's going to be on fold of the paper. And for this style, I'm going to put 1.5 centimeter hem. That's it for today. I hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching, and I see you next time.